All right, everyone. Hello, hello. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. If you've been here before, you know the drill. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. I'm your host, Leanne Lord. I am also a stand-up comedian, and my comedy special, Even More Funny Women of a Certain Age, him, is now streaming on Apple TV. I'm also delighted to share that next week I'll be emceeing the Scopes Trial Centennial Conference in Chattanooga, Tennessee, hosted by CFI and the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It commemorates the 100th anniversary of the historic Scopes monkey trial. That was a landmark case in 1925 that pitted biblical literalism against evolutionary science. And it argued whether American schools should be places of science education or religious indoctrination. Clearly, the battle wages on. Now, tonight's topic is how the pyramid scheme shaped America. We're talking multi-level marketing, y'all, MLMs, which is by design difficult for most people to understand. These programs offer like a world of pink Cadillacs, white column mansions, tropical vacations, and most precious of all, financial freedom. But surprise, surprise, overwhelming evidence suggests that most people lose money in multi-level marketing and that many MLM companies are actually pyramid schemes. So the question is, how is this legal? And an even better question, what are the people at the top doing with all that money? We are delving into these shark-infested waters with Bridget Reed, the author of Little Bosses Everywhere, How the Pyramid Scheme Shaped America. I actually have a copy of the book. I'm so excited. Bridget is a features writer at New York Magazine, reporting on housing inequality and on the real estate industry for Curve. Now, y'all, Little Bosses Everywhere is one of the best books I've read this year. And when I say read, I mean that I binge listened to all the 11-hour and 1 minute unabridged audiobook, stopping every so often to share the juiciest tidbits with my partner because I am a huge fan. Y'all didn't know this. I am a huge fan of the topic of schemes and scams, empowerment, pyramids, Ponzi's, politics, all of it. Actually, the politics part of it, which I hope we'll get to talk about tonight, is terrifying and yet clarifying. And so I'm thrilled that we get to have a conversation about this with tonight's guest. And if you're joining us live, you too have an opportunity to ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box. And we'll get to as many of them as we can toward the end of the show. And now it is my pleasure to welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents Bridget Reed. Bridget, welcome.
Hi, Leanne. I'm so
Hi.
happy to be here. I'm a skeptic. I love skeptics. They feel at home.
Well, welcome, welcome. I would say as a journalist, particularly for the topic the topics that you write about, um, being a skeptic in the best of all possible ways is incredibly, incredibly helpful. You know,
Yes.
you're like comedians, you're the person that goes, "Hey, wait a minute."
Yeah.
Now, I want to get us started off in the best of all possible ways. I want to start with the basics and making sure that we define our terms because people might not know the difference between what is multi-level marketing, what is a pyramid scheme, and how are those two things different? Can you start us off there?
Yeah. I mean, and just that basic question actually gets to the sort of heart of the book because we live in an era that is the product of a lot of misinformation about this very question. It's sort of a chicken and egg thing where we have this concept of the pyramid scheme, which you know is a scam, right? It uses the word pyramid scheme, it has negative connotations. Then we have something called multi-level marketing, which is a legal American business that has, lobbyists on Capitol Hill, that has enriched some of the most powerful people in the United States, that Donald Trump himself has been the spokesperson of, right? So you think, well, that's different from a scheme. But we only have pyramid schemes because of multi-level marketing. And
Mm,
so it's a very complicated answer, and it's actually sort of even how you ask it kind of sets up already by asking it, and not, I'm not blaming you at all, but we're falling into, oh, there's a difference, right? Already we're setting up that there's a difference. And what the book is really arguing is that there's no difference. I think there's tons of evidence that there's no difference, and it's a really long story. So I would love it if everyone read the book and bought the book. But anyway, quick and dirty, a pyramid scheme. And I'm gonna not look at the chat because it's gonna distract me. But I had it open. I'm gonna close it. Only because the questions are already really good. I can tell. So
Hmm.
actually, let's start with a Ponzi, because that's much more basic structure. Although pyramids, Ponzi's, it's all the same thing in terms of how they expand. So think of a Ponzi scheme. Your classic Bernie Madoff, that was a Ponzi scheme, or of course, the Ponzi scheme is named for a stamp arbitrage scheme created by Charles Ponzi, who's a scammer from the 1920s. He, went and solicited investors for what he said was an incredible investing scheme, and he was doing some international stamp arbitrage. That was how he was supposedly making money. He made fabulous returns. Those people said, "Oh my God, here's more money." They told their friends. It mushrooms across the country. And what happens? All he's doing is robbing Peter to pay Paul. That's a classic Ponzi. So it is a fake, a fraudulent growth scheme where the engine of growth is just more investors paying into the scheme. Eventually, it grows very fast, right? It grows exponentially, and then usually collapses when it runs out of new marks, because it constantly requires new people to pay in order to pay those returns, because there isn't really anything generating the money, right? There's no real business. Um, this is a very old type of fraud. There's related frauds called the chain letter. That's another one where maybe you've gotten in the mail, oh, you pay a penny now, pass it on later, you're going to, get a ton of money, right? In the 70s, there was a sort of new age Ponzi, and they were called, the airplane game was one, lots of different names. But that's the basic structure of a Ponzi. So a pyramid scheme is that exact same structure of a fraud, but it uses the sale of a product to cover up that engine of growth. So instead of, I'm taking your money, Leanne, because I'm investing it in some incredible, fake hedge fund or whatever, actually, I'm going to take your money because you're buying products, and then you're going to sell the products. So that's very basic, and pyramid schemes became well known in the 60s and 70s in the United States, and then the United States tried to crack down on them. So where this gets complicated is, what is the difference between the pyramid scheme and multi-level marketing? That the people that invented multi-level marketing, they were doing the same thing as the people who were told they were doing pyramid schemes and whose companies were shut down in the 60s and 70s.
Right.
So there really isn't that much of a difference. What the legal definition of a pyramid scheme is if you are being paid more in this scheme for people that you recruit, your rewards are coming from recruiting than from selling the product. So I'm sure I'm sounding convoluted. I assure you I'm trying to sound very clear, but basically, so in a pyramid scheme, you, Leanne, are signing up to be ostensibly a saleswoman. You think you're going to sell products to make money. And what is different about a pyramid scheme than a traditional direct selling is, like, instead of just signing up to be, say, a fuller brush guy where you're buying products and you're selling them door to door and you get paid the difference, right? You buy them at a discount, sell them at a retail price, you get the difference. That's traditional door to door selling. In a pyramid scheme, you get to recruit sellers under you and also make money off of what they're doing. And the legal definition of a pyramid scheme is when you are actually making, like I just said, more rewards from those recruits than from the sales. So the sales of the products don't matter. What's really generating the money in the scheme is recruiting. And you can see how that just mimics the Ponzi, right? Because all of those people under you, your own sales women or men, also have to pay in just like you did. So it's just an investment scheme where there's a sale of a product that's covering it up. And again, it's a longer answer as to how we now have something called a pyramid scheme and then a legal business called multi-level marketing that operates in the same way as a pyramid scheme. But that is the case. And it involves a lot of right-wing fundraising, and it involves a lot of smoke and mirrors. But that's sort of the quick and dirty answer to that question.
No, no, I appreciate it. I wanted people to hear that. And I know the way I asked it was like, well, wait a minute, they're the same. But just to get that clarity. So I want to ask you about two specific companies, just as an example, that I'm sure many of us grew up with if we sold or our parent or mothers did it. Is there a difference between Mary Kay and Avon? Like, what is
Mm,
one
mm.
multi-level marketing and is one just selling lipstick?
Yeah. So there is now not really a difference. Avon,
No.
yeah, Avon has, and again, it's all kind of hard to tell because these compensation plans are extremely convoluted and hard to really, even when the FTC does sue a company for being a pyramid scheme, it takes a lot for them to prove it because they make these structures extremely sort of overcomplicated. Um,
Yeah.
but the experts in the know, um, according to them, Avon started as regular door-to-door selling, and then moved into MLM, started compensating people for recruiting, just like MLM. Mary Kay has always been a multi-level marketing company. So, but that's a good way to illustrate the difference and sort of how you can tell an MLM from regular door-to-door selling. Avon, one of the oldest direct selling companies in the country, in the world, um, started in the 19th century. It was first called the California Perfume Company, and it's one of the first to employ largely, exclusively actually, women as salespeople. But again, regular old structure. These women would buy products from the company. They were independent contractors. They would buy the perfume, the makeup, and then go around and sell it. And they pocketed the difference. Um, what is different about multi-level marketing and what the men who invented MLM figured out was they could sort of masquerade as direct selling, but instead of rewarding people based on what they sold, like if you were in Avon and you were a shitty saleswoman, you weren't really making money, right? Because you were getting commissions on what you sold. In MLM, all that matters is you're a good recruit, and because you're getting rewarded on what you and your downline recruits buy. So that is the distinction, and that they've been covering that up for 100 years. But if you go back and look at the world's first MLM, which was called Neutralite, in that company, what those men figured out was we can just pay people based on what they buy, pretend that they're going to sell it, call that retail sales, but really all we're doing is incentivizing salesmen to buy more products and to recruit others under them to buy too. So Mary Kay comes from that same system of companies, not from Avon. The guys who started Neutralite, they went off and branched and started their other MLMs, one of which is Amway. And Mary Kay is another one. Her husband was a sales trainer for one of these other MLM companies, and she just copied the business model and created Mary Kay. And they cover that's something that they covered up for years and years. MLMs love to tell origin stories where their founders sort of develop this amazing sales tactic out of the sky or whatever, or they're genius. But no, they really just created this, figured out a fraud and copied it all over the country, and then unfortunately now the world. But no, so Mary Kay, in the book, actually, I track one woman in Mary Kay, and it's really helpful to see exactly how Mary Kay works and why it's a pyramid scheme. Because in Mary Kay, and this woman was still enrolled when I interviewed her for many months. I went and saw her back office at Mary Kay, so I really saw how she was paid and how the company tracked her purchases. This woman, it did not matter if she sold a thing. Mary Kay tracked her purchases as sales. So, for example, the first thing she was incentivized to do in Mary Kay was spend $1,800. In Mary Kay, what she bought, that $1,800, is called production. And immediately that's logged as $3,600 in sales because in Mary Kay, you're ostensibly getting a 50% discount. So in theory, if she went and took all those makeup products and sold them all, she would make it would be worth $3,600. Of course, none of that happens because the products are overpriced. No one wants to buy makeup from the woman they see at Target because you're in Target, so you're just going to buy makeup from Target, right? The business model doesn't make sense. Um, but right away, she is in her uplines are incentivized to get her to buy stuff. Now she's in the hole. She's incentivized to recruit and get them to buy stuff, and on and on and on and on. And that's an MLM.
Okay, there are so many directions that I want to go here, because you've touched on the fact that it was, a couple of guys, whose names elude me, who created this scheme that just keeps getting replicated, kind of like the board, and but that it seems like it's majority women. So who are MLMs targeting, and why are they targeting? Because the examples that you use in the book were all, all women. And not to say that it is all, but in your book, and it's like they seem particularly at risk. Like, what are those numbers and why?
So MLM, when it was first invented, like I said, it was invented by two men who were kind of down and out salesmen, who were down on their luck in 1945, and this kind of like just getting into the post-war era in American history, but really kind of feeling like the long tail of the Depression and then World War II. So a lot of kind of malaise in society, a lot of economic upheaval. So even two white guys in California were struggling, right? And they recruited white couples, white suburban couples. So those were the first targets of multi-level marketing. It was a business that people could do very quickly. Again, they were independent contractors, but men and women could kind of work together, and women were able to participate, but they weren't threatening the family unit, right? They weren't going into an office, they weren't going into a factory. Men and women could work together, and women could still do childcare, do the cooking, do domestic work, right? So it was very almost this like 50s Leave It to Beaver way of recruiting men and women to make income, but without kind of rocking the boat in the gender balance. So that's like the 50s and 60s when it started. Amway, same thing. Amway was the first offshoot of Nutrilite, the first MLM, and that was also very conservative, very Christian. They were Calvinist Christians living in Michigan, and so same thing. Um, in the 60s, MLMs, those scammy MLMs that mushroomed really quickly and got a lot of attention, and why we have the term pyramid scheme. They're kind of lost to history. You might not have even heard of them. They're called Holiday Magic. There was one called Cost Cut. These at the time were like national scandals. They had like, huge stories in the New York Times, and the gurus at the top of these companies were so flashy and crazy, and they had like profiles in Life magazine and all this stuff. Those were men. Those were men. And then what happened in the 60s was Mary Kay started Mary Kay, and then other women copied her. And by then, the labor market had shifted enough where women were the prime target of this low cost, flexible, independent contractor work. And that was happening throughout the economy, not just in this little scam economy. So, overall, in the United States in the 60s and 70s, women went to work, but they were going to work in these insecure parts of the labor market. They were clerking, they were working in retail, they were working in service, and they really needed to supplement their income, or they were still stuck at home doing childcare and they also needed to supplement their income. And MLM, these founders very quickly figured out that women were a great target for this empowering, independent work, but it's your schedule. You don't have to clock in, and you don't need a degree to do it, right? The pitch has always been very populist, very the American dream. It's all up to you how hard you can work, how big you can grow your organization, and women were in the 60s and 70s, especially. The women's movement had started because more women were working, more women were independent, women were getting divorced, women were leaving their husbands, and MLM enabled, it sort of glommed onto that women's lib, but in this way that was also allowed conservatism, right? Because these women are, again, they don't have to get full-time jobs to do this work. They can still be the perfect June Cleaver and add a little money to the sugar bowl. And women then became the predominant salespeople in MLM starting in the 60s until now, where around 75% of MLM participants are women, with the caveat that this is a figure that the industry's own lobbyists put forward. I think that they really rely on using this feminist argument as a marketing tactic. I don't know if we really know whether it's still so predominantly women. I think a lot of young people are getting into MLM. A lot of MLMs now overlap with like crypto or fintech, and those are really male dominated. So I think anywhere there are vulnerable people, they have credit card debt, they have healthcare debt, they have housing debt. They're working jobs, but they're what we call underemployed. So they have jobs, but they're not enough to pay their cost of living. That to me, from the research I've seen, um, yes, women, I think, often occupy in lots of places more of those people of color. But I think men and women in many parts of the country are vulnerable in that way. So, the women thing is a kind of double edged sword because, yes, most MLM sellers are women, but I do think the industry, like I said, also kind of likes that narrative. Moms, single moms, young women, those are the ideal MLM seller, and that MLM is helping them feel empowered, you know?
Thank you so much. I think it's so important. You really got to the key of it. When people are vulnerable, when they don't have enough money, and that's men and women, that's young folks, that's anybody who might have a lot of debt. Um, I want to go very shortly to the work that you've done because you went to the belly of the beast. And I actually asked about the difference between Mary Kay and Avon because full transparency, everybody, I sold Avon. And I'll tell you how it happened. I was a teenager. I wanted money. I saw an ad
Yep.
in the paper and I went in and I signed up. And when it was time to go and, finalize my paperwork, my dad took me down to the office and they said, I was 15 years old at the time. And they said, honey, you're too young. You can't sell this. And I burst into tears. And my father said, am I old enough to sell it? And they said, yes. So my dad became the Avon rep on record. And so I feel like my dad was in my downline.
Oh my God, funny. Well, and so this is really interesting though. In your experience, I mean, were you successful in selling the products? Did you make a little
Yes.
pocket money?
Yes, so much so. Like I did the paperwork. My dad was the salesman. Like any father, any parent who sells candy at the job for their kids. My
Yeah.
dad took in the Avon books, and at one point he's like, this Avon's messing up my taxes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean,
So,
I was a kid. I didn't
and
know.
so did you recruit? Did you need to recruit?
No, that's
Yeah.
why I was so surprised. I guess, this was so early on, at least for me, that recruitment thing was not an issue. We were
Well,
really selling products.
and some companies, it now has, the business model can differ and the way that you're
Okay.
compensated can be very different. Um, some companies are sort of savvy and they have a sort of regular old sales force. Like one example is Cutco knives, which I don't know if you've ever known anyone. When I was in high school, that's what I had a lot of, they were mostly male friends actually who did Cutco knives. And so that's just door to door selling knives, which I know is like sort of seems insane that teenage boys were selling knives all over town, but that's true. But again, let me ask you this. Did you ever make an income, full-time income, even close to a full-time income selling Avon?
Oh, no, absolutely
No,
not. This was pocket money that a high
pocket
school
money.
girl
Right,
would
right.
be very happy with.
Exactly, exactly. So that often is at the kind of base, the most public facing of a company's way that people can make money. And then what they do is, maybe you're not a high school girl, doesn't need to make an income, but if you are a single mom, if you are older, if you're looking for a real career, what they will do is
Mhm.
they will say, oh, Leanne, you're so good at selling Avon. you should do the business opportunity and you should recruit a team and build a team. And so then there's an upper
Oh,
kind of more, a bit of a hidden business where you can build a team and that's the business opportunity. And that can be really predatory because then,
yeah.
Leanne, to join that, you have to invest. And so that's where they're going to get you to buy a lot of product and to recruit other people. So that doesn't, that's also quite tricky because it can make an MLM business look just like normal direct selling. But again, the key would be, are you able to like, are you just making a little pocket money? Because if so, if there are people in that business who claim that they're making like, they just bought a house with Avon, then I
Yeah,
think they might be
I'm not
making money on recruiting. Right.
I'm not sure how you're making money on Sweet
Yeah.
Honesty perfume and Timeless.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
But they
Um,
are. I mean, that is the argument that MLM makes to the world is that we have multi many millionaires who are millionaires because they sell
no.
Amway's overpriced like energy drinks and water. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. And it makes no sense, and that's why being a skeptic is so important because you're Joe, the regular Joe is like, wait, there's something this doesn't make sense, but then they immediately bombard you with so much other information to make you think, well, wait, I'm wrong, actually. Actually, I'm limited or I'm not strong enough or I'm not brave enough or I'm not creative enough to like go here. And people buy in.
Well, I mentioned this slightly earlier. You went to see this firsthand, not just, reading and reporting. You got yourself you went undercover at a Mary Kay convention. I hope you kept all your receipts for the clothes and the shoes that you probably had to have to blend in this Mary Kay universe. And I want to know. I'm sure you did this for the book, but what did you meet? What did you learn? And what kind of gave you pause? Like what was disturbing? Or I shouldn't frame it that way, but I'll go back to what did you learn, having gone there and seen it firsthand?
Yeah, so if we go back to how Mary Kay or any MLM works, what's so remarkable about it is that you are paying in every month. Um, when in theory you are a saleswoman. So just imagine like the people in this watching this Zoom probably have all different kinds of jobs, right? But imagine like that you were recruited to work for a company, but you're also told you're a business owner because you're told when you're an independent contractor in an MLM that you own your own business, but you're paying every month for these products, but you also like sign an employment agreement and you have to go to arbitration. You can't sue them. Like you look and act like an employee, but you are paying all the time. So it's very exploitative, like on its face. I mean, no other American retail business works this way. It makes no sense. But people do it all the time. Like Monique, that woman I mentioned who spent that $1,800 right away. I mean, she was spending thousands, pretty much almost $1,000 a month for years on her Mary Kay business because the compensation structure is incentivized in such a way that if she recruited enough people and they were all buying, they were getting these checks back from the company because she was building her organization. Now they never were enough. I mean, she's in the hole for what she thinks is over $75,000 over 13 years. But her uplines kept telling her, just keep investing. One day you're gonna build enough of a business that it'll be passive income. You'll get all that money back. And they have all these, Steve Jobs spent whatever $1 million before he made his first million. Or like you can't sell from an empty wagon, so you need all these products. Like they had an answer for everything. So I say that because when you've never been in it, I think it's really easy to dismiss that as like, okay, well, you're stupid or you're naive or you're, just not asking the right questions. And so be going to the Mary Kay convention and knowing how it worked, I mean, the women in the room are spending thousands of dollars. And then what's crazy is they're being celebrated as saleswomen when all that's being counted is what they buy. So like this woman herself, Monique, she had been celebrated as like a queen of sales and for selling $20,000 worth of products. All she had done was she and her group had bought $10,000 worth of products, and they just, like I said earlier, they double it for the 50% discount. Anyway, so like, how are people still doing this? Why are they staying in it? And so the convention is really the most important place to see that, because what they do is they really, for lack of a better, to use a sort of overused term, they love bomb you essentially all the time. And so this woman, Monique, was a veteran. She's a Black woman living in Florida. She doesn't have family where she was living. She was really vulnerable in a lot of ways, but she was on disability from the military. So she had that nice little check coming in every month. So the Mary Kay ladies like that because it means you have money to spend on products every month. So they really went after her. And I mean, how she described it to me is like she felt purpose, she felt community, she felt loved, like truly that word, you know? And so the indoctrination is very, very intense. They bring you in, anyone in an MLM will tell you, you know, you get brought in very quickly with like so much outpouring of enthusiasm and support. And in our country, where there are a lot of people who don't get that from the places you think you're going to get it, right? They're not in a school environment where they're getting a lot of accolades, you know, from teachers. They're not moving up a career ladder. They're not, maybe they have a home environment that's not great. You know, that's really powerful to feel like you have value, that you are valuable, that you're in control of your life. It's incredibly psychological. You know, this is a woman who really needed direction, and Mary Kay like gave her that direction, and then they they the compensation is almost gamified. You know, all those different levels I talked about, like building your group and how much you're going to get back at every turn. It's like, oh, you could win a purse, you're going to win a lunch with a much higher upline. Oh, you can go on a cruise, you can win a trip, a free trip, you'll get the free car, which is the pink Mary Kay Cadillac. You know, all of that is like the it's almost like your phone, right? It's like a dopamine hit for her, and making her feel like she's actually building towards something. And then convention is the most sensory overload of them all. And there are several cult experts. Steve Hassan is one, who he was in the Moonies in the 70s in that cult. He has written and talked about how the MLM convention environments are very similar to like a high intensity cult environment, because you really are, you know, you're supposed to stay up all night and listen to these speakers. You're running around, you're not eating, you're told, oh, you have to go to every single thing. You can't take a break. And I saw it. I mean, I saw women walking around holding their heels. They were so tired. You know, they're eat, sleep, thinking Mary Kay. I talked to a woman who had driven 9 hours from El Paso, and you're supposed to wear a skirt in your car just in case you like stop at a gas station and someone talks to you about Mary Kay. You need to show the brand. It is a lot like a cult in terms of it's a very high intensity environment, and it's highly coercive. These women are constantly talking in Facebook groups. They're talking on, Mary Kay has a chat system called Voxer. And there's a lot of pressure to buy. If you're not hitting your numbers, if your group's not hitting your numbers, what this one was doing is putting it on her credit card and just slotting in their own social security card numbers to make it seem like they were buying. And that happens all the time. So it's just this constant exploitation. And the convention was the way I really started to feel empathetic and understand why these women were basically participating in their own exploitation. And it was incredibly moving and powerful to be all together. Like, even I got something out of it. And I was, you know, I really did though. You know, they were getting up there and really like, I know I'm answering in a really long-winded way, but like MLM has long been very confessional. It almost has a religious aspect where you're supposed to get up there and not just talk about how much you love the products and selling, but how it changed your life. You know, you were an addict, or you know, were unhappy in your marriage, and doing this business opportunity really saved you. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. It's called your why. And so for this woman, Monique, it was that she was in the military and she was able to buy a house. Meanwhile, her uplines knew she bought a house with a VA loan, not with Mary Kay, but they just lie. And so the corrosiveness of lying, I mean, it's almost like these women are hurting all year and then they get together at the convention and they can actually like heal together. I mean, one woman got up and said, my daughter died and I waited to bury her until I went to this other convention, and people were like, I was sick and Mary Kay helped. Like, it's a lot of talking about like really common pain, but instead of solidarity of like, let's heal in a way, I don't know, like just being in a support group, the way we're going to heal is we're going to sell Mary Kay. And it's like capitalism on steroids. Anyway, that was a
Well,
long answer, but it was it was a crazy experience.
it's capitalism on steroids and apparently estrogen, because this is so wild. It's when you talk about the convention, the manipulation, the love bombing, it also sounds like hazing, in a way, if you've ever done the sorority or the fraternity
Yes, yes, very much similar.
experience, and you've bonded through your own sort of self-inflicted trauma or group inflicted
Mhm, mhm,
trauma.
mhm.
But this leads to, and I really really want to get to this, if most people are not making money in this, like something over 90% of people who join, they're not going to like hit these astronomical
No.
numbers that are being advertised.
Mhm,
So the
mhm.
real question is, who is making the money and what are they doing with it? And I'm going to take a leap and go, how did this lead to Betsy DeVos? Because I'm going to tell you, that blew my mind. I had to go sit down. When I saw that
Yeah.
trajectory, I'm like, oh my gosh, it makes sense. Kill me now. What is happening? So yeah, who's making the money? What are they doing it? And Betsy DeVos?
So just like a Ponzi scheme, if you think about Charles Ponzi, right? I mean, all of these people were paying him. And even though he was paying returns to other investors, he was like taking a fee, from I think hundreds of thousands of people uh, were eventually in his scheme. So,
Oh,
you know,
wow.
he's really making the money there. If you think about a pyramid scheme or a multi marketing company, what it does is there's now an unlimited amount of Charles Ponzi's, right? Because in MLM, you're told you can build as big of a group as you can. You have to pay a cut to your upline, but you can be as big of a boss as you want to be, right? If you're a good recruiter, you can build your own pyramid under you as long as yes, you're in a place in the pyramid, but you can build your own pyramid. That's like the way that, that's really the logic. Um and so what that does is it does create a layer of people at the top who are making a lot of money. And in the United States, especially in Amway, which is one of the oldest MLMs, I mean, there are families that have been making money in Amway since the 60s, and they still have those positions in the downline. And so, no matter those groups, it really is a fixed position in that what they call, there's lots of different names for it, but the downline. Amway has its own kind of language. There, if you join Amway in India, you're connected in that downline all the way up to those original people, right? And so think about it. Even if those people are buying a starter kit at Amway that maybe costs like $100 here, maybe it costs like $10 in somewhere like India or the global South, where because Amway has now spread all over the world. Think about how much money that is. If hundreds of thousands of people, there are hundreds of thousands of people in Amway in the United States. If just those people are buying every month, I mean, that's a lot of money. So you have not only Amway, which is like the company or whatever MLM company. So the company is making a lot of money, right? Because everybody has to buy products every month. But then those original people at the top of the pyramid, they're also making a lot of money. And so same thing in like Herbalife, for example. Some of the Herbalife sellers joined in the 70s and 80s, or yeah, in the 70s and 80s. Herbalife was started in 1980, so 80s, 90s. But anyway, those people are still making money because the group under them has grown so big. So, anytime the companies themselves when they're forced to reveal what they call income disclosures. So the only data we have, because these are private companies, on and even the public ones, they don't really disclose all the income, right? Like Herbalife has been a publicly traded company, but only when the FTC sued Herbalife did we learn that 90% of people in Herbalife don't make any money. 90%. And the income disclosures we have, Mary Kay in Canada, for example, they have to disclose this. It's like a fraction of a percent are making, even a living wage. So even the tops, maybe 10 to 15%, they're making like less than $5,000 a month. Like it's pennies on the dollar. And that's across the board. Like no MLM has ever been able to shake that fact. And what they'll say is, well, those people didn't want to make money. I mean, what kind of business isn't ashamed of statistics of success like this? I mean, it's shocking. It's shocking. It'd be like even at American businesses that you could argue are exploitative, like maybe Amazon, maybe Walmart, right? Companies that have been sued for their labor practices, companies that have been the subject of, strike attempts and organizing attempts, they still make, minimum wage. We can point to, right, a income that everyone is making. I mean, these companies are just like a totally different world, where people are not even making poverty wages. And of course, those are gross figures, right? They're not net. So they don't count what people spend. So when you count spending, I think the majority of people lose money in MLM. I think that if we really were able to get into everyone's books, that's what it would show. So, second part of your question, we haven't really explained or gotten into why this is legal, which we started with. And again, that's a really long story, but the short version is that in the 70s, when those early companies had become really scammy, they attracted, state AGs all over the country were so upset about pyramid schemes. It was the consumer topic of the day. Walter Mondale tried to, pass a pyramid scheme bill. It was that big of a deal. It was a national crisis. And so the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, went after these companies, and tried to shut them down and shut a few down. And then it got to Amway, which by then was the biggest and most influential MLM company in the country. And by the time 1975, the FTC sues Amway, Gerald Ford, who was the hometown congressman of Ada, Michigan, where Amway is based, who had helped open the Amway Center for Free Enterprise, which is a right-wing political building, think tank, propaganda factory that the Amway guys built in the 70s. So basically, like their huge ally, he became president. Then they helped fundraise for Ronald Reagan, who became president in 1980. And the year before that is when the FTC made this decision, basically exempting Amway from being called a pyramid scheme. And so there's lots of other ways. I mean, the Amway founder is Rich DeVos, so that's where we get the DeVos last name. Jay Van Andel. They became hugely influential by the time the FTC basically had its sights on them. So they were some of the biggest RNC, Republican National Committee donors. They were giving huge amounts of money to the Republican Party, but also they helped found the Heritage Foundation. They were helped. Jay Van Andel was in charge of the Chamber of Commerce. Very influential organizations on the right wing in the United States, what we might refer to now as the new right. So they also helped bring together evangelicals, very sort of fringe at the time, right wingers, libertarians, build this coalition that helped elect Ronald Reagan. So all of that's happening in the background when the FTC is finally ready to take down Amway. And what they did instead was they said, okay, Amway, you claim that you have some rules internally that keep you from being a pyramid scheme because they, make people sell their products, whatever. We're going to take your word for it. And they accept Amway's version of events. It's not even that they sort of opened Amway's internal documents and tested all these rules to make sure that people weren't buying a ton of products, being rewarded for recruiting, all the things we just went over that make a pyramid scheme a pyramid scheme. Instead, Amway said, we follow these rules. It keeps us from being a pyramid scheme. And it's going to be called something called multi-level marketing. And that's how a legitimate business called multi-level marketing was born. Even though Amway comes from Nutrilite, just like those other companies that were shut down came from Nutrilite. So does Herbalife. They're all connected. Um, and so it really is this what you could call a type of it's a type of big lie, of why that's legal. And so the DeVos family, um, they have given to all kinds of Republican candidates since. That Donald Trump was not their first choice for president. They're Jeb Bush fans. But they, Trump went and kissed the ring in Michigan, immediately, got the favor of the family when he won. Betsy was chosen as his education secretary. And now the biggest, I think, presence we feel of these families is in Doge, because the Heritage Foundation's role and Project 2025 in sort of directing Doge and the extreme deregulatory agenda of MLM. I mean, that is what they want. They want to ensure that the impunity that Amway got by creating this business that's, indistinguishable from an illegal business, that all, corporations, private companies have the same level of impunity that they do. And so, not to sound tinfoil hatty, but our political environment that we're in right now is very directly related to multi-level marketing.
Listen, if it's tinfoil hattie, I will make my hat
A
and
long question.
yours.
Sorry.
Um,
Yeah.
I do want to. I listen. I have you should see all my papers here. I have so many questions for you, because I will say, because I'm going to take some questions here from folks. But one of the eye-opening part of your book for me was the research that you did that connects multi-level marketing to the eugenics movement and the other far-right movements that were that were fringe back in the day, back in the day being like not too long ago. And that really, really just blew my mind. So no tinfoil hat required here, my dear. Um, Elizabeth Wilford, thank you. First of all, thank you everyone for signing in, for watching, for listening, for sending in your questions. Wants to know, do we know if the people who get sucked into MLM are also gamblers or do sports betting or frequently buy lottery tickets? And then thank you so much for your book on this topic and today's discussion. So I guess there's so many other things that can be added into that question. Are there things that predispose you to this? Because I remember when you talked about Monique in the book, she mentioned coming out of the military, she was sort of primed to follow directions. She was sort of primed to do what she was told, to be led.
Hmm.
So is that all folded into it? That there's, again,
Yeah.
is-
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. There's not data, I think that would be a really interesting study, honestly, of MLM participants and, whether they engage in any of that other activity. Honestly, my experience is the opposite, that actually people who join MLMs, like, they're really like, the recruiting is incredibly sophisticated. Like, Amway these days in New York City, where I live, will recruit young people by saying it's financial mentorship, and they really hammer, they make it sound incredibly viable. They're not saying, you could be really good, depends how good you are. No, they say this is guaranteed, it's a proven formula, blah blah blah. They make it seem absolutely airtight. And sure, there are lots of disclosures that they maybe are supposed to be making according to company policy. There's very little regulation here. And I know I sort of sped through the deregulation part, but basically, like MLMs since that 1979 Amway decision have been fighting regulation at every turn. You know, the FTC does attempt to make rules that would make recruiting for MLM really difficult. You know, MLMs, people will approach you on the street for that financial mentorship. They won't even say the name, right? So even just forcing MLMs to say the word Amway, that would be a regulation, right? Or forcing these companies to give those statistics about income disclosures up front and allow people time to sit with them. You know, they don't have to do that. So it's not like MLMs recruit and say, hey, 90% of people fail in this business. You want to join? They absolutely say the opposite. So I actually think that unfortunately, because it's so unregulated and it's just so dispersed, it's a very dispersed business model. There's no body that's in charge and watching this. You know, people say the wildest stuff, and they definitely make it seem like anyone can be really successful. And I think smart people don't see it as a risk. I don't think.
And it hits, and I think you talked about this in your book. It hits that sweet spot where all of us as Americans have been primed. If you just work hard, if you just work the system, if I'll sleep when I'm dead. I'm smart. I can do this. It's that carrot that's dangling, and you think you're gonna win the car. You think you're gonna be the millionaire, and why not? Give it a shot. I
Hmm.
hope, as we've gone through this, Kay Danowski had the question, and I do believe it's been answered. If pyramid schemes are legal, how do schemes like Mary Kay, a good friend, fell for this, Amway and Shockley are allowed to operate? And you just said they have been fighting this regulation tooth and nail. And in the book, you mentioned like the AGs, the attorney generals, said it was like whack-a-mole, if I'm paraphrasing correctly. Like you tell one to stop, and then like five more pop up, and then you only have the
Yeah.
enforcement powers. You have limited enforcement power and resources.
Yeah. I mean, it is a complicated story, and I really, encourage people to read the book, because I tell all that I just did, but in a much better way and a much more detailed way. But yeah, I mean, essentially, we don't have a pyramid scheme law in the United States, right? This is not a Supreme Court case. This is not, we don't have, this has not been adjudicated. It's more like a legal precedent was set with that Amway decision. And
Mhm.
a regulator in the book calls it a box. It's like once,
Yes.
and it was just one guy making that Amway decision. The FTC, it's a law judge who recommends he sort of rules on the FTC, and then the commission votes. That's how the FTC works. After the agency sues a company like Amway, or like it eventually did with Herbalife, and then the same thing just happened. They fined Herbalife, but they didn't shut down the business model. Once the FTC said, okay, in theory, something called multi-level marketing that's not a pyramid scheme could work, but it was all hypothetical. Now it sets this incredible precedent where they have to actually argue that a company is a pyramid scheme. Um, you know, instead of just being able to say this whole thing, all of it is pyramid schemes, right? And now they have to actually prove every single time on new grounds. And so it's created a legal precedent that is extremely difficult to untangle without a pyramid scheme law that Congress passes, which is incredibly difficult because MLMs give to politicians across the aisle. Mitt Romney takes money from MLMs. Kristen Sinema takes money from MLMs, on and on and on. There are at least 4 or 5 past Amway members who have been in Congress. So anyway, yes. But yeah, it's the legal precedent that makes MLMs are like a gray area, that a wild west.
And it would seem intentionally gray. Uh,
Absolutely. 100%.
uh, Now, Rona Boston, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. Do these companies have stockholders? That's not a thing for these groups, is it?
Well, yeah, I mean, Herbalife is a publicly traded company, which is
Oh,
astonishing to me, and I think says a lot about Wall Street. Um, because, all Herbalife really reports to its stockholders are its profits. And even in even in the drama when Herbalife was sued by the FTC, and then Bill Ackman, the financier, tried to short Herbalife, basically argue that it was a pyramid scheme, and the stock went up
Yeah.
and down. Yeah, that was happened in 20 between 2012 and 2016. Um, you know, again, if you're making money on on people buying products from Herbalife, you're doing well, right? Because the way the company works, these people are constantly buying products. It's a good scam. So honestly, for the stockholders, if all that Herbalife is required to really report is what they're selling to their participants, I mean, you're just going to look at those numbers, right? It's like, for whatever reason, Herbalife stockholders have not kind of like been convinced by so much evidence that the people who are buying the products are being scammed. I think that's more of an indictment of Wall Street and how the SEC works, right? Like, I would want to know, if I was an Herbalife stockholder, like how much people are actually making money in the company, and those disclosures are incredibly low. Like, I wouldn't make a bet on a company where 90% of people fail, but they do because people buy products. And also, just
Mm,
short caveat, MLM since the 80s, most participants are overseas. So that's like a huge problem. It's not even Americans that are doing the majority of the buying in and spending their money. It's poor people all over the world. So that's also like an even more sort of dark and disturbing thing about Herbalife being a publicly traded company. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of, I really don't understand. If I was a stockholder, I would be shook to my boots about how these companies work. But people aren't, I guess. I mean, people invest in like tobacco companies. People invest in bad, people invest in private equity companies that, raise the price of insulin. Like,
yeah.
that's not new.
We seem to have an epidemic of terrible people.
Well, and
Keith,
capitalism really, yeah, allows that, right?
yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't bring out the best in us. At least I don't think it does, or at least it doesn't right now. I'm not sure if it ever did, if we're going back to the robber barons. But Keith
Mhm.
actually asked a question about this 90%. Clearly there's a lot of turnover in these companies.
Yes.
Is there an average time about, where these 90% of people who don't make money give up? Like, are they 6 months in? Are they a year in? Or is that just not really measurable? It's like
Hmm.
these
Hmm.
they when do they give up, or is this 90% still sticking in there for some reason?
Yeah, that's actually like a huge way I think that these companies have been around so long, is the high turnover. And, again, there's no regulatory body that requires MLMs to like report their data. All we have is really the or the DSA, the Direct Selling Association, which is the organization that lobbies for MLMs, and all of that is self-reported, so like very difficult to trust. But those the we have the companies that have been sued by the FTC and that we have seen, I mean, the turnover can be as high as 75%. I think some companies probably do have maybe even close to 90%. Um, even before MLM was a thing, Avon in the Depression had like a crazy 400% turnover or something. Like, these types of jobs already are really vulnerable to people who like jump in because it seems like a quick fix and then quickly
Mhm.
burn out. And actually, the FTC released a revised economic paper a few years ago. That traditional idea of the pyramid scheme kind of mushrooming and expanding, and what they call like popping. So, a pyramid scheme that takes over your whole town, and then everybody's finding out about it and everyone's losing money, and then it collapses. That
Yes.
actually, what's more common is that people are, even the very first recruits in Amway, it's not like all of them were amazing, right? Some of them failed. Some of them weren't good from the get-go. Even in Nutrilite, the very, very, very first MLM, some of those people weren't very good recruiters, right? And so there are always people churning, and actually all the companies they don't need anyone to be successful. They just need a constantly replenishing stream of unsuccessful people. They actually need most people to fail because they need a constantly new people. I mean, that's really the engine that keeps them going, is like it's more like, instead of one big pyramid, it's like constantly building and breaking little pyramids all over.
Like a Jenga, a pyramid Jenga. It
Yeah, a
breaks
little bit.
and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Listen, I know we are at the top of the hour, and I just want to get in a couple of more questions,
Sure.
if you're good with
Yep.
that. Because
Mhm, mhm.
David Billett, this will come. I don't know if this is controversial or not, but at this point, would you consider the FTC to be complicit with these operations? Say
Um,
no, but
yeah, well, and the FTC changes, right, over time. And so there are some FTC commissioners, especially appointed by Republican presidents, who have been very open that like they support multi-level marketing, that they don't want to go after it. They've left the FTC and then worked for MLM. So like, yeah, there are definitely some FTC commissioners who have been complicit in
right,
multi-level marketing. I think then where you get into a debate and the sort of the world's kind of foremost experts on this really do debate like how much the FTC by doing everything it can, which is to go after MLM companies in the way that they can, whether they're just kind of repeating the narrative that we've just spent the hour tearing apart, right? That MLM is something different from pyramid schemes and that it exists, right? That there is such a thing as multi-level marketing that is not a pyramid scheme and is not a fraud. Every time the FTC goes after an MLM company and says you are a pyramid scheme, they also are sort of by default saying other companies then that we haven't taken down are legal, right? They are multi-level marketing. So even when they take down a company, some experts feel that then they are kind of reiterating the fact that well there is a legal way you can do this. And so I think a lot of people who defend the FTC say that the role of a regulator is different than a role of an activist, is different than a role of a consumer advocate, is different than, you know what I mean? But the FTC like has long been accused of being, not as kind of muscled as they could be, right? And going after private enterprise, private companies. Um, yeah, I sort of see both sides of the argument, and maybe that's just because I'm a journalist and I sort of my job is to kind of be as empirical as possible. But yeah, I think there's lots of ways of thinking about. I mean, I know a lot of people who work at the FTC are incredibly passionate about this and really care and really feel frustrated at how their hands are tied, by something that happened before many of them were born.
okay. I want to wrap this up. Actually, I really don't. I really don't want to. But even going back, what I read in the book and what you shared, especially when you went to the Mary Kay convention, and how you see how folks can be swept up, in the emotion of it and the community of it, and the pressure and all of that. And it has I'm being very generous here, a bit of a cult-like feel. And you mentioned the gentleman who wrote the book about leaving the Moonies. So yeah, it does have that cult environment. My question is, what advice would you give someone or anyone who maybe has a loved one who's in an MLM, or how do you
Yeah.
get out if you're in? Those are maybe two different questions, but
Yeah.
it's
Well, I mean, I think the number one for anybody, for even before, like just anybody joining what's supposed to be a business opportunity and an income opportunity. If you're being asked to buy stuff, just wait. If you're being asked to invest, and yeah, I think give yourself as much time as possible to like really see what that is. Um, I mean, the red flags for MLM are, buying products that you can get at the store, and then being pressured to recruit friends and family. Those are the number one things to look out for in MLM. Um, and MLMs will call themselves direct selling, they'll call themselves network marketing, they'll use all kinds of euphemisms. And so, you should be wary. And then I think when people's friends and family join, um, you shouldn't buy the products. Actually, if your sister joins a multi marketing company and you think you're helping her by being her first like successful sale, you're just continuing her kind of like entrenchment in the company, you know? You're encouraging her because what happens is once you go through what they call your A list, your B list, and your C list. So your A list is like your family members, your B list is maybe your coworkers, your C list is like random people on Facebook that you went to high school with, right? Once you've exhausted and you might be successful and get those people who love you and feel bad for you to buy some stuff. Once that's over, you have a bunch of products and have spent a bunch of money. And now you're going to have to start the real recruiting, right? And so if you're a family
Hmm.
member, all you've done is kind of like basically just gotten that person hooked and helped them get hooked by the company. And so it might seem like counterintuitive that saying no is hurting them, but actually I think you're just prolonging if you say yes and buy the product. So, I mean, that's the number one thing I would say. And if that person is really deep in, um, the online sort of ex MLMer community is really fantastic. They're on Reddit, they do YouTube shows, they do
Hmm.
Instagram, and many of them like act almost like deprogrammers. Like you can, you know, they field messages from family members and friends who want advice, and they will give it, and they'll chat. They are very open. And so I would send people there and say, talk to others and find out what worked for them to help people. But truly, I think, yeah, the number one thing is like don't buy the stuff, don't spend your money, and maybe buy a copy of Little Bosses Everywhere and give it to them
Yes,
for
no, yes,
Christmas.
absolutely buy a copy of Little Bosses Everywhere. I was not
Yeah.
kidding when I said this is one of the best books I've read. I mean, part of it is that I'm really into this stuff. When the Bernie Madoff thing happened, I was all in. I called Ruthie like she was my girl. No, that was his wife. I did not know her, but that's how invested I was in all of this. Um, my dear Bridget, thank you so much for
Thank you so
coming on,
much.
for taking the time, for staying a little bit over the hour. I really appreciate that. And I just want to remind all of you in the audience that if you missed any of tonight's conversation, it's been recorded and will be available at skepticalinquirer.org. And as always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, and of course to all of you in the audience for spending your time with us tonight. My name is Leanne Lord. Good night and good luck. Bridget, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Thanks everybody.